Okay, so today I'm working on an 11 by 14 linen panel by Centurion. With my drawing already established, I'm starting this one out with a raw umber pick-out underpainting. I do this by laying down a layer of umber with Winsor Newton Liquid Original and using some Q-tips to pull out the lighter areas, such as her face, the stepping stones, and the brighter parts of the foliage. I then lay down a thicker, more opaque layer of paint for all my dark areas, such as the reflections of the water, the grate behind the figure. This will allow me to have my value scheme of light, dark and mid-tone already organized before going in with color. I want that set up as the nature of the painting like this will make it very easy to lose that organization. Now by nature, I mean that whilst there is a lot going on in this painting, I don't want to lose focus of the fact that my center of interest is the figure, framed in that 2/3 sweet spot of the environment. Almost everything I paint in the environment will be in service to the figure to help support it and not detract from it. Now, within that environment, I have a huge range of different surface textures to deal with, from worn out metal, rough cut stones, perfect modern stepping stones, a wall of foliage and ivy, and rippling reflections in the water. Dealing with it all can be overwhelming, and any one of those areas could steal the show and take away from my figure. It's a hard challenge of striking a balance of not doing any of it as an afterthought, yet not overdoing an area either. This is why you'll often see me work in several layers, trying to bring up the painting as a whole. There are some stylistic decisions I have to make, particularly in the foliage. I don't want to paint this one leaf at a time. It's not wrong to do that, you can definitely do that, but it's not how I want to paint. It's usually my goal with something like foliage to convey the effect of what I'm seeing and later on indicate a few prominent bits of detail that are coming forward in order to represent it in the painting. I try to do this first by carving out the large shadow shapes I see, then work up the value scale as I paint in large masses of leaves. I'm using a number 4 flat ivory brush by Rosemary & Co, and I'm squinting down to identify the larger shapes of foliage. By squinting, I'm still going to see shape, value and color, but it will remove confusing details at this stage that could overwhelm me. As I move into the water and reflections, I want to keep in mind that most of the time, things will appear slightly darker than the actual object or material that's being reflected. I actually started the water by laying in some of the large darker ripples as they acted as a guide or a grid and helped maintain a sense of depth and perspective. Plus, having those dark marks in the lower half of the painting were really helpful in judging my values as I did the water. I wanted to mention something as I start to work on the rock and stepping stones here. When I first started to get my work reviewed by professional artists and art directors back in 2019, something that came up regularly was that the subjects in my paintings, whether they were figures or landscapes, were too evenly lit, meaning there was little to no sense of fall off of the light where the light was being focused. Someone's head might have been illuminated just as much as their foot. Since then, I have tried to show gradation in everything. I'm paying very close attention to that in these stepping stones there is a fall off in brightness as you go from right to left in the painting. And even though those stones are technically white, I will reserve the highest point of contrast and brightest accent for around the face of the figure, where the brightest highlight will be on her neck and on her fringe of her hair. As I went in for a second pass on the wall of foliage is where I genuinely started to lose the plot a bit. In my desire to be a bit more brushy and just get down the effect of the leaves, the actual design and organization got away from me. Often there is no paint Y by doing X answer. Sometimes it's trial by error, and there is more push and pull in trying to achieve the effect you're going for. I feel as though I spent a lot of time fussing, which I am loath to do. It was actually something that in the moment I thought, I've got this, I'm fine. Then after stepping away and letting it dry, I thought, I definitely do not have this, I'm not fine, can I even paint? I need another crack at this, which is what you'll see me get to. It was a similar problem with dealing with the bricks on her right. How do I deal with the texture on the bricks without rendering them to death? I'm not going to copy every bump and bevel I see, so I need to do my best to glean how to translate what I see in my reference and interpret that for the painting, whilst also not going insane. I did this by really trying to identify what color and value I see in these bricks. I see an overall warm grey midtone, then some slightly darker, cooler crevices on the left, slightly warmer and lighter on the right, and some richer darks for the deeper shadows. And the combination of all of those together will give me the effect of the texture I'm going for. As I hit the highlight going down the side of the wall here, I've actually used a little bit of liquid impasto to give some extra body to the paint. Reflections can be fun to paint, or at least the effects you can achieve are very satisfying when laying things down in a certain procedure. I have the basic shape of what is being reflected laid and dry. Then I can go in with a dark mixture of burnt umber and ultramarine blue and break up those shapes with these rippling marks. Once I have the environment well established, I now feel confident in laying in the figure. It is really my preference to relate the figure or figures to the environment that they're in, rather than paint the environment around it. It always gives me much better results in evaluating things like color and value. Now again, I need to make a stylistic decision, as at this scale, the face is about the size of my thumbnail. So I am not going for a perfect likeness of my wife. My focus is going to be more on the character and attitude of the figure. Things that I can capture at this scale are the gesture of the pose, the tilt of her face, and the general shape language of her hair, nose, and chin. I'm going for some very subtle indications when it comes to things like eyes, eyebrows, and the mouth. I feel at this scale, it's much better to understate than overstate something. Painting in layers will allow me to address certain things at certain stages. So as I fill this in, I'm simplifying things down to just a light side and a shadow side, giving these two value statement in the figure. And yes, that is a 9 Inch Nails tote bag. She loves Trent Reznor. As I said, I felt as though I had lost that value organization I was going for in the foliage. To remedy that, I'm going back in and re-establishing those main shadow shapes, which I'm then going to build around. Now I'm still not painting individual leaves, but I am slowing down and trying to identify what is happening within the clumps and clusters I can see. As I do this, I'm really trying to pay attention to value and temperature. As the foliage comes out of the shadows, it's dark and very cool, and I'm being selective as to where it gets brighter and warmer, and put in the suggestion of a few single leaves. Going back in to refine the face, I'm putting in this rim light down the back of her hair, which is really going to help separate her from the background. Something that I could emphasize here was playing up a juxtaposition of warm and cool, particularly on her fringe, where we have a warm highlight on the right and cooler bounce skylight on the left. Then around her eyes and the bridge of her nose, there was this beautifully cool snap of bluish violet that's the skylight coming from above, but then in the lower half of her face, where the warmer sunlight is bouncing off the rocks and water, we have these warmer reddish tones in the shadow. And if I need to, if I lose the right shape of her head or neck, I can just mix up more of that dark tone and paint back into the figure to carve out the shapes again. And as I said earlier, it's actually around her neck where I've reserved the highest point of contrast between the brightest and darkest points of the painting to pull the viewer's attention. Then I went in to dirty up the stepping stones so they don't look totally pristine and that they belong in this environment, painting in some of those moss and algae textures where they meet the water. Then I have another chance to further refine those reflections, making sure that whatever happens above happens below, but again, just a slightly darker version. And then lastly, rippling down those highlights, reflecting off the stepping stones. Now I'm really trying to push a few extremes. With the glaze, I'm darkening the shadows down the side of the brick wall. Then over on the foliage, I'm being very selective and putting in a few individual leaves that hit the hotspots of each of the major areas. I really want to have a foreground element that's going to help push the depth of the piece, and putting in this foliage that is overlapping everything else is going to do just that. Again, in doing things like this, I'm not just copying my reference, and honestly, I wouldn't even have the patience to do that. What I'm doing is looking at my reference for information that I can then use to interpret into paint to sell the overall believability of the piece. And then it's time to claim responsibility and put my name on it. Well, thanks for watching the video today, and I hope you got some helpful advice on placing the figure in an environment. Now, if you did, please like the video and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. You can carry on watching right now if you like. And down below, you'll find links to my Instagram, Patreon for exclusive content, and my website. Thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate you watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.